Welcome to David's Stories. Today we follow Gary, a devoted father humiliated by his daughter's scorn who seeks justice, exposes betrayal, and reclaims his dignity. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly tales of truth and triumph. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The air was thick with the scent of roses and champagne, a gilded haze that clung to the twilight in Richard Wilson's backyard. I stood at the edge of his sprawling lawn, my calloused fingers wrapped around a glass of Merlot, its deep red catching the flicker of string lights overhead. The party buzzed with Concord's elite neighbors in tailored suits, colleagues with diamond cufflinks, their laughter a polished hum that grated against my nerves. I wasn't one of them, not really. My khakis and faded button-down marked me as an outsider in this sea of wealth, a retired engineer who'd built bridges and circuits, not fortunes. But I was here for my daughter, Christina, the girl who'd once called me her hero. Tonight, though, her eyes held something sharper, something I couldn't quite name. The fountain at the center of Richard's garden gurgled, its marble cherubs gleaming under the moon. I watched Christina glide through the crowd, her silk dress shimmering like liquid starlight, her diamond earrings catching the light with every turn of her head. She was radiant, my little girl, grown into a woman who commanded attention. Beside her, Jonathan, her husband, moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his worth was measured in gold. They were a perfect pair, polished and untouchable, orbiting Richard, her father-in-law, the man of the hour whose birthday they were here to celebrate. I took a sip of wine, its bitterness sharp on my tongue. The glass trembled slightly in my hand, a faint tremor I hope no one noticed. I'd driven my old pickup to this party, its rusty blue frame parked discreetly down the street, out of sight from the gleaming Porsches and Teslas lining Richard's driveway. Christina had noticed, though. She always did. "Dad, maybe one day you'll trade that rusty relic for something with a bit of shine," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. Her lips curved into a smile, but it wasn't warm. It was a performance, sharp and deliberate, meant to sting. The crowd around us. Tom from the country club, Susan with her tilted wine glass, a dozen others froze, their laughter fading into awkward coughs. My jaw tightened, heat rising in my chest like a spark catching kindling. "Funny, Christina," I said, forcing a chuckle that sounded hollow even to me. "Some of us value reliability over flash." My voice stayed steady, but my grip on the glass didn't. A bead of wine slid down the stem, glinting like a warning in the dim light. I caught Tom's pitying glance, Susan's quick look away. They saw it, the chasm between me and my daughter widening with every word. Christina tossed her hair, turning to Richard with a syrupy smile. "Daddy-in-law, you deserve the best. Don't you think, Jonathan?" Her husband raised his glass, his Rolex flashing as he clapped Richard's shoulder. "Absolutely," Jonathan said, his tone slick as oil. "Only the finest for Dad." The word "dad" landed like a slap, aimed not at Richard, but at me, the man he'd ignored all night. The crowd murmured approval, their eyes darting between us, weighing the scene like vultures circling a carcass. I stood there, my loafers sinking into the grass, my pride stinging sharper than the wine. Christina hadn't always been this way. I could still see her, at 6, her tiny hand in mine, begging for piggyback rides through our modest backyard. I'd carried her dreams, then packed them into that rusty pickup when I drove her to college, paid for her education with every overtime shift I could scrape together. Now she wielded her words like weapons, each one honed to cut deeper. "Let's show them the real star of the night," Christina called, her voice bright, but edged with something colder. She beckoned the guests toward the street, her heels clicking on the stone path. The crowd surged forward, their excitement a living thing pulling me along despite the ache in my chest. I followed, my steps heavy, the grass soft underfoot. The street lights cast long shadows, and there it was, a Tesla Model S, plaid, its sleek black curves gleaming like a predator under the moon. Jonathan stepped forward, puffing out his chest. Fully loaded, he announced, "For the man who has everything." Richard beamed, running his hand along the hood, his reflection distorted in the car's polished surface. The crowd gasped, their faces alight with awe, their whispers weaving a tapestry of envy and admiration. I shoved my hands in my pockets, swallowing the bitterness that rose like bile. My own reflection stared back from the Tesla's curved gray hair, tired eyes, a man hollowed by time and sacrifice. "Generous kids you've got," Tom muttered beside me, sipping his scotch, oblivious to the knot in my gut. "They sure know how to make a statement." Yeah, I said, my voice lighter than I felt. They do. But my eyes were on Christina, who hugged Richard with a performer's grace, her smile flawless, her glance toward me fleeting and cold. It wasn't just indifference. It was disdain, a blade wrapped in silk. Jonathan tossed the key fob in the air, catching it with a grin. The crowd clapped a wave of sound that drowned out the cicadas. I raised my glass for a toast, my voice steady despite the storm inside. To Richard, Jonathan cut me off, his tone sharp. Gary, no boring speeches. Dad's the man of the hour. Christina's laugh was a shard of glass slicing through the air. I lowered my glass, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. The party swirled on lobster sliders, passed on silver trays, a quartet launching into Fly Me to the Moon. But I drifted to the edge of the lawn, my mind replaying her words. Rusty pickup. That truck had carried her to her future, her dorm room, her dreams. I'd paid for it all, and now she mocked me for it. Gary, you okay? Susan Richards' neighbor touched my arm, her wine glass tilting, a red droplet splashing onto the grass. Her brow furrowed, her eyes soft with concern. Just taking it all in, I lied, nodding toward the crowd. She hesitated, then rejoined her husband, leaving me alone with the weight of my thoughts. I wanted to confront Christina, to demand why she'd turned so sharp, so cruel. But the words wouldn't form, not here, not now, under the gaze of Concord's elite. The argument came later as the guests thinned out, their voices fading into the night. I found her by the dessert table, rearranging macarons with the same calculated grace she used to wound me. Christina. I started, my voice low, steady though my pulse hammered. That comment about my truck. What was that? She didn't look up, her fingers pausing over a pastel pink macaron. Oh, Dad, don't be so sensitive. It was a joke. Her tone was light, but her eyes were steel, unyielding. A joke. I stepped closer, my glass slamming onto the table, the clatter cutting through the quartet's melody. You think humiliating me in front of everyone is funny? Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. Humiliating, Dad, you're making a scene. Jonathan appeared at her side, his arms sliding around her waist, his presence a wall between us. Easy, Gary, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. No need to ruin a good night. He patted my shoulder, the gesture heavy, dismissive. A few lingering guests glanced over, their whispers like static in my ears. I opened my mouth to retort, but Richard called Christina over, his voice warm, oblivious to the storm brewing. She glided away, leaving me with Jonathan's smirk and the echo of her words. The party's glow dimmed my pulse, loud in my ears. I lingered by the street as the last guest trickled out, the Tesla gleaming under the streetlights, a monument to everything I wasn't. As I walked back to my truck, Concord's dark streets stretched before me, the air cool and heavy with the scent of lilacs. My steps echoed in the quiet, each one a reminder of Christina's cold glance, Jonathan's laugh, the weight of their betrayal. I climbed into my pickup, the familiar creak of the door grounding me, but the engine's rumble couldn't drown out the questions swirling in my mind. Why had she changed? What had I done to deserve this? At home, I sank into my armchair. The lights off, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The Merlot glass sat on the coffee table, its rim stained with the night's bitterness. I stared at it, my mind sifting through memories of Christina, her gap-toothed grin, her crayon drawings tucked under my pillow, the way she'd called me daddy, with a trust that felt unbreakable. That girl was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a relic, a punchline. But there was something else, a flicker in the shadows of my thoughts. The Tesla, the extravagance, the way Jonathan's Rolex gleamed with a smugness that didn't quite fit. I'd spent my life as an engineer solving puzzles, finding flaws in designs others overlooked. There was a crack in their perfect facade. I could feel it, like a fault line waiting to split open. I leaned forward, my fingers tracing the armrest, the leather worn but sturdy. My 65th birthday was a week away. I'd hoped Christina would mark it with something meaningful, something to bridge the gap between us. Now doubt crept in, cold and heavy, whispering that she'd let me down again. Yet as I sat in the dark, a spark ignited in my chest. Not anger, not yet, but something sharper, more deliberate. I wasn't the fool they thought I was. I'd built a life of quiet strength, a legacy of sacrifice they'd never understood. If Christina thought she could bury me with her mockery, she was wrong. I'd find the truth behind that Tesla, behind their polished lies. And when I did, I'd make them see me not as a rusty relic, but as a force they couldn't ignore. The lamp in the corner flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room. I stood my reflection in the window, catching my eye, gray hair, tired eyes, but a glint of something new, something unyielding. The game had changed, and I was ready to play. The morning sun spilled across my porch, painting the weathered wood in shades of gold. I sat in my wicker chair, the creak of it as familiar as my own heartbeat, a chipped coffee mug warming my hands. 3 days until my 65th birthday, and despite the sting of Richard's party, a stubborn hope flickered in my chest. Maybe Christina would surprise me. Maybe she'd see me, really see me the way she used to, when she'd slip her tiny hand into mine and call me her hero. The air smelled of dew and lilacs, conquered aching with the soft hum of kids pedaling bikes and birds chattering in the oaks. I sipped my coffee, its bitterness grounding me, and let myself dream of a gesture, a watch, a letter, something to mend the fracture between us. Morning, Gary. Ellen, my neighbor, waved from her mailbox, her terrier yapping at her heels. Big plans for the big 65, I grinned, setting my mug down. Just a backyard shindig. You and Pete coming? Wouldn't miss it. She tugged her dog back, chuckling. Christina got something grand planned after that Tesla for Richard, I bet. Her smile was curious, but her words landed like a stone in my gut. We'll see, I said, keeping my tone light. She's full of surprises. Ellen nodded and headed inside, leaving me with the echo of her question. Surprises. Christina had always been good at them, crayon drawings tucked under my pillow, her gap-toothed grin lighting up my world. But now her surprises cut deeper like thorns hidden in a bouquet. I grabbed my keys and drove to Main Street Cafe, the buzz of chatter and scent of cinnamon, offering a needed refuge. The bell jingled as I stepped inside, the warmth wrapping around me like an old friend. Gary, the usual Maria, the owner, leaned over the counter, her apron dusted with flour. Black coffee, 2 sugars, I said, sliding onto a stool. And one of those scones if you're feeling generous. She laughed, her earrings swinging. For you always. Turning 65 soon, right? Bet. Christina's got something big planned. Her words were warm, but they twisted the knife deeper. I forced a smile, nodding as she poured my coffee. While waiting, I glanced at my phone. No messages. I'd texted Christina yesterday about the party, hope you and Jonathan can make it. No reply. My thumb hovered over her name, but I pocketed the phone instead. Let her come to me. The radio hummed in the background, an ad about college tuition, pulling me back to Christina's graduation, my sacrifices, the late nights, the second mortgage I'd taken to pay for her dreams. The ache grew sharper after her jab at Richard's party. Outside, I spotted Pete, Ellen's husband, wrestling with a loose fence post in his yard. Need a hand, I called, hopping out of my truck. Gary, you're a lifesaver, he grunted, passing me a hammer. We worked in silence, the thud of nails steadying my thoughts. As we finished, Pete wiped his brow. So what's Christina getting you? Something flashy like that car she gave Richard? I laughed, but it sounded hollow. Maybe. Long as she shows up, I'm happy. The lie tasted bitter. I wanted more than her presence. I wanted her respect. Later, I polished my pickup in the driveway, the rag gliding over its faded blue hood. It wasn't a Tesla, but it had carried us through blizzards. Moves memories. I paused, catching my reflection in the windshield, gray hairlines deeper than I remembered. Reliable Christina had called me once, her voice soft with pride. Now she mocked it. The thought gnawed, but I pushed it down. She'd come around. She had to. My phone buzzed as I headed inside. A text from Christina. We'll try to make it. Busy week. No warmth, no emoji, just those curt words. My smile faltered, my thumb tracing the screen. Busy. After all, I'd given college, her wedding, my pride. I typed a quick sounds good. See you then, and hit send, my optimism fraying at the edges. By evening, I was in the backyard stringing up party lights. The air was warm, the grass soft underfoot. I imagined the scene, neighbors laughing, Christina unveiling some grand gesture, a watch, or a trip, something to show she saw me. I clipped the last light in place, its glow flickering against the dusk. A breeze swept through, cool and sharp, carrying the faint buzz of my phone. I checked it. Nothing. Just the wind and that nagging doubt whispering she'd let me down again. Birthday morning dawned with clear skies, the bustle of final preparations keeping my nerves at bay. I set up folding tables, checked the grill, and glanced at my phone. No messages from Christina. By evening, guests started arriving, their voices filling the yard with the warmth I craved. I stood by the gate greeting everyone, Ellen and Pete, my brother Carl, old friends from the engineering firm. The string lights swayed gently, casting a golden glow over checkered tablecloths. A country playlist twanged from the Bluetooth speaker, mingling with the scent of charred hot dogs and lilacs. I stood by the grill, a beer in hand, grinning as Ellen told a story about her terrier stealing a burger last summer. To Gary, Carl called, hoisting his drink. The man who keeps Concord running. The crowd cheered, and I waved them off my cheeks, warm. Their gifts piled up on a table, a homemade apple pie from Ellen, a history book from Carl, a bottle of whiskey from Tom. Thoughtful each one. But my eyes kept drifting to the gate, searching for Christina's car. Open this one next. Maria pushed a small box toward me, her smile wide. I tore the paper, revealing a mug with "World's Best Engineer" in bold letters. The crowd hooted, and I held it up, my laugh genuine. "Maria, you're too kind," I said, setting it with the others. My chest swelled with gratitude, but beneath it, anticipation churned. Christina's gift. What would it be after that Tesla for Richard? I couldn't help imagining something big. Something that said, "I see you, Dad." 2 hours later, the gate creaked. Christina swept in, her silk dress shimmering like a mirage, Jonathan trailing in a tailored blazer. They looked like they'd stepped off a magazine cover, out of place among the jeans and sundresses. I rushed over, my smile wide despite their tardiness. "You made it," Traffic Christina said, air kissing my cheek. Her perfume was sharp, overwhelming. Jonathan nodded, already scrolling his phone. My stomach dipped, but I brushed it off, leading them to the food table. "Grab a plate. Join the fun," I said, gesturing to the spread, coleslaw burgers, Maria's famous potato salad. Christina scanned the yard, her lips pursing slightly, like she was appraising a thrift store. "Cute setup, Dad," she said, her tone clipped. Jonathan snorted, pocketing his phone. I ignored the jab, introducing them to Carl, who clapped Jonathan's shoulder a bit too hard. The party rolled on, but their presence shifted the air. They hovered near the dessert table, whispering to each other, barely mingling. I caught Ellen's raised eyebrow, Tom's sidelong glance. Then Christina approached, a store-bought gift bag dangling from her fingers, tissue paper spilling out like a bad prom dress. "Happy birthday, Dad," she said, handing it over. Her smile was tight, her eyes elsewhere. The crowd quieted, watching. I took the bag, my heart pounding. This was it. I reached inside, pulling out a bottle of shampoo and a bar of soap, generic, the kind you'd grab at a gas station. The bag hit the table with a soft thud, tissue paper crumbling. "For you," Christina said, her voice loud, performative. "You don't deserve more." A few guests gasped. Jonathan chuckled, leaning back in his chair. My fingers tightened around the shampoo, the plastic cool against my palm. I forced a laugh, my face burning. "Thanks," I managed, setting it down. Creative choice. The words tasted like ash. I wanted to believe it was a joke, but her smirk, his laugh, they weren't joking. The crowd shifted, their murmurs soft, pitying. Dinner brought more. We sat at the long table, and the clink of forks and chatter filling the gaps. Christina leaned forward, her voice cutting through. "This house, Dad, it's so quaint. Ever think of upgrading?" Her tone was sugar-coated, but the barb was clear. Guests shifted, their smiles strained. "It suits me," I said, my fork pausing midair. "Not everyone needs a mansion." A few nodded, but her eyes narrowed. Jonathan jumped in, his grin, wolfish. "Yeah, but a little ambition never hurt, right, Gary? Maybe freshen up that smell of yours." He waved a hand like swatting a fly. Christina's laughter was cruel, sharp, a blade slicing through the air. A child at the table, Tom's granddaughter, tugged my sleeve, her eyes wide, confused. The yard went quiet, the music suddenly too loud. My chair scraped back, the sound raw against the grass. "Enough," I shouted, my voice cracking the air. Plates rattled, a glass-tipped water pooling on the tablecloth. Christina's smile vanished. Jonathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Every eye was on me, the weight of their stares heavy. "Gary, they didn't mean," Ellen started, but I shook my head, my pulse roaring. "No," I said, quieter now but firm. "They meant it." Christina stood, tossing her napkin down. "Ungrateful," she hissed, grabbing her purse. "Come on, Jonathan." He followed, muttering about wasted time. They stormed through the gate, their car's engine roaring moments later. The guests sat frozen, their murmurs soft, pitying. I stared at the gift bag, its crumpled tissue mocking me. The lights flickered above, and my anger burned steady and dangerous with nowhere to go. The party fizzled out, guests whispering, avoiding my eyes. Some tried small talk, but the words felt forced. One by one, they said their goodbyes, their hugs tighter than usual, as if they sensed my wound. When the last guest left, I stood alone amid scattered plates and dimming lights. The silence was heavier than my anger. I stacked plates, the grass damp under my loafers. The air smelled of leftover charcoal and lilacs, a mix that should have felt comforting but didn't. Carl had stayed longest, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "You didn't deserve that, Gary," he'd said, his voice gruff. They crossed a line. Ellen had hugged me, her perfume soft against the ache in my chest. "Stand tall," she'd whispered. Their words propped me up, but now alone doubt crept in. I paused, a half-eaten slice of cake staring up from a plate. My reflection in the patio door caught me off guard, gray hair, tired eyes. Had I overreacted? Christina's smirk, Jonathan's taunt about my smell, they'd meant to wound. But shouting like that in front of everyone, maybe I'd given them what they wanted, a scene, a reason to call me ungrateful. I shook my head, grabbing a broom to sweep the deck. The bristles scraped rhythmically, grounding me. No, they'd pushed me. Years of slights flashed through my mind, sharp and unbidden. After Christina's wedding, I'd paid for the venue, the flowers, her dream dress. I'd called to check on her honeymoon, my voice eager only to hear her sigh through the phone. "Dad, I'm busy," she'd said, her tone clipped like I was a nuisance. I'd stared at the receiver, the dial tone humming my generosity thrown back in my face. The memory stung, but it steadied me. I wasn't wrong to snap. They'd been chipping away at me for years, her coldness, his smug pats on the shoulder. I swept harder, the broom catching a forgotten scarf, its silk snagging on the wood. Ellen's, probably. I folded it carefully, setting it aside. Small acts of care. That's who I was, not the man they painted. Carl's voice echoed from earlier. "You've given them everything, Gary. What have they given you?" He'd lingered by the gate, his truck keys jangling. I'd shrugged, forcing a smile, but his question stuck. Nothing. They'd given me nothing but scorn. I carried the scarf inside the house, quiet except for the creak of the floorboards. In the kitchen, Ellen's hug replayed, her quiet strength urging me to stand tall. "They're ungrateful," she'd said, her eyes fierce. "Don't let them walk over you." Her words lit a spark in me, one that hadn't died with the party's end. I sank into my armchair, the old springs groaning. The gift bag sat on the coffee table, its cheap paper crinkling as I nudged it. Shampoo and soap, a $20 insult. My fingers traced the bag's edge, the texture rough against my skin. This wasn't just a bad gift. It was a message: "You're nothing to us." The thought tightened my chest, not with sadness, but with something harder. Anger. Righteous. Clear. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling and its familiar cracks mapping my thoughts. I'd spent my life building circuits, a home, a legacy of quiet sacrifice. They'd mocked it, but no more. I wasn't the fool they thought. I'd show them, not with shouts or scenes, but with something deliberate, something they wouldn't see coming. My fist clenched, the knuckles pale against the armrest. The house was dark, the only light spilling from a lamp in the corner. The gift bag seemed to pulse in the shadows, a challenge. But there was something else, a whisper in the back of my mind, like a blueprint unfolding. That Tesla, their wealth, it didn't add up. I'd seen Jonathan's smug grins, Christina's cold glances, the way they moved through Richard's world like they owned it. There was a secret there, a flaw in their design, and I'd find it. The next morning, I woke to a notification on my phone. A Facebook post from Christina, time-stamped just after midnight. Worst father ever. Threw a tantrum at his own party. So embarrassing. Below, a photo of the shampoo and soap captioned, "His big gift, LOL." It had 20 likes. Her friends piled on. "What a jerk. You deserve better." My heart slammed against my ribs, the cafe's hum fading. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. She hadn't just mocked me in private. She'd broadcast it, turned my pain into her performance. I hit her number, the phone cold against my ear. It rang twice before she picked up. "What, Dad?" Her voice was bored, like I'd interrupted her manicure. "Take it down," I said, my words clipped. "That post. Now." She laughed, sharp and brittle. Oh, please, it's just the truth. Deal with it. Christina, I'm not asking. My voice stayed low, but it trembled with something dangerous. The barista glanced over, her eyes concerned, but I didn't care. You're making it worse, she said, her tone icy. Everyone saw how you acted. I'm not deleting anything. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, her laughter echoing in my skull. The mug shook in my hand, coffee sloshing over the crack, burning my fingers. Gary Tom, a regular, slid onto the stool beside me. His newspaper crinkled. You look like you saw a ghost. I forced a chuckle, setting the mug down. Just a rough morning. How's the grandkid? We chatted about his granddaughter's soccer game, the words mechanical. His kindness anchored me, but Christina's post burned behind my eyes. Worst father ever. After all I'd given her, college, her wedding, my pride. I paid and left the cafe's warmth no match for the chill in my chest. Walking home Concord streets felt different, the colonial houses watching me. My warning to Christina replayed, deal with it. But I meant it differently now. She thought she could humiliate me and walk away. She was wrong. Back home, I sank into my armchair, the gift bag still on the coffee table, its crumpled tissue a wound I couldn't touch. The lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room. I closed my eyes and a memory surfaced, Christina at 8, clinging to my hand at a county fair, her eyes wide, trusting. She'd believed in me then, her daddy who could fix anything. Now she called me a liar to the world. The contrast sharpened my resolve like a blade honed on stone. I wasn't done. There was a secret behind that Tesla, behind their perfect life, and I'd find it. My engineering mind kicked into gear, tracing patterns, seeking flaws. I'd built bridges that withstood storms. I could unravel their lies. The lamp flickered again, and in its dim glow, I saw the first step of a plan, forming a spark in the dark, waiting to ignite. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, its rhythm a counterpoint to the storm in my chest. I stood at the counter, the coffee maker, gurgling, the scent of dark roast curling through the air like a whispered promise. Dawn crept through the curtains, casting slanted light across the cracked mug, in my hands a relic from a decade ago, when Christina still called me Daddy, and her laughter didn't cut. The gift bag from my birthday sat on the coffee table, its crumpled tissue a silent taunt. Shampoo and soap, a $20 insult that burned hotter than the coffee scalding my tongue. Christina's Facebook post. Worst father ever flashed in my mind, its 20 likes a public wound, her friends' comments piling on like vultures. I set the mug down, the crack under my thumb, a mirror to our fractured bond. Enough was enough. I'd spent my life as an engineer solving puzzles, finding flaws in designs others overlooked. That Tesla, their gleaming monument to Richard, didn't add up. Jonathan's Rolex. Christina's designer dresses, their Nantucket vacations. None of it matched the income of a mid-level corporate climber like Jonathan. There was a secret there, a crack in their polished facade, and I'd pry it open. My fingers tightened around the mug, the heat grounding me. This wasn't just anger. It was a blueprint, forming a circuit, sparking to life. I grabbed my keys and headed to Main Street Cafe, the familiar bell jingling as I stepped inside. The place buzzed with morning regulars, retirees reading papers, a mom corralling her toddler. Maria grinned from behind the counter. Gary survived the big 65 barely, I said, sliding onto a stool. My laugh thin but steady. Coffee black. Toasted bagel. Coming up, she said, her apron swishing. I pulled out my phone, more out of habit than intent, and opened Facebook. Christina's post stared back, the photo of the shampoo and soap, a dagger in my gut. I scrolled through the comments again. What a jerk. You deserve better, each one a fresh cut. My daughter had turned my pain into her stage, and Concord was watching. Gary, you okay? Maria set my coffee down, her brow furrowing. Fine, I lied, my voice tight. Just family stuff. She nodded, hesitant, and moved to another customer. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness sharpening my focus. I hit Christina's number, the phone cold against my ear. What, Dad? Her voice was bored, like I'd interrupted her morning yoga. Take it down, I said, my words clipped. That post, now. She laughed, sharp and brittle. Oh, please, it's the truth. Deal with it. Christina, I'm not asking. My voice trembled with something dangerous, low and steady. The barista glanced over, but I didn't care. You're making it worse, she said, her tone icy. Everyone saw your tantrum. I'm not deleting anything. The line went dead, her laughter echoing in my skull. I stared at the phone, my knuckles white. The coffee sloshed in the mug, burning my fingers. Gary Tom, a regular, slid onto the stool beside me, his newspaper crinkled. You look like you saw a ghost. Just a rough morning, I said, forcing a chuckle. How's the grandkid? We chatted about his granddaughter's soccer game, the words mechanical. His kindness anchored me, but Christina's post burned behind my eyes. I paid and left the cafe's warmth no match for the chill in my chest. Walking home, Concord's streets felt different. The colonial houses looming like silent judges. My warning to Christina replayed, deal with it, but it wasn't enough. Words wouldn't fix this. I needed action, something precise, something they wouldn't see coming. Back home, I sank into my armchair, the house quiet except for the creak of the floorboards. The gift bag pulsed in the shadows, a challenge I couldn't ignore. I called Frank, my old accountant friend, his number etched in my memory from decades of shared beers and late-night talks about numbers. Gary, been too long, he said, his voice gruff but warm. What's up? I need a favor, I said, keeping my tone even. Christina and Jonathan. Something's off with their money. That Tesla they gave Richard, it doesn't add up. Can you dig a pause, then a low chuckle? You always had a nose for trouble. Meet me at the corner diner, 10 room. I hung up, my pulse quickening. The lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room, like a blueprint coming into focus. The diner's door swung shut behind me, the jukebox crooning an old Springsteen tune as I spotted Frank in a corner booth. His gray hair was thinner now, but his eyes held that accountant's sharpness, a glint that missed nothing. I slid into the cracked vinyl seat, nodding. Frank, good to see you. Gary? He said, a smile tugging at his lips. Been too long. The air smelled of coffee and fried eggs, the checkered floor scuffed from years of Concord's comings and goings. The place felt like my old engineering office, functional, no nonsense, a space for solving problems. And I had a problem. We ordered black coffee for me, decaf for him, and got to it. You said you had something on Christina and Jonathan. I said, leaning forward, my hands clasped on the Formica table. What did you find? Frank's hands shook slightly, his arthritis worse than I remembered as he pulled a folder from his bag. You're not gonna like it, he warned, sliding it over. Look at this. I opened it, my eyes scanning bank statements, wire transfers, Richard's name in bold. My pulse quickened. They bought that Tesla for Richard, Frank said, his voice low. Big show at his party, right? Thing is, it wasn't their money. They siphoned it from Richard's accounts, forged his signature, moved funds through a shell company. Slick but sloppy, I leaned back, the booth creaking. The Tesla, their grand gesture, was a lie. My daughter and her husband stealing from her father-in-law to play the heroes. My coffee sat untouched, steam curling up like a warning. How'd you get this? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage bubbling inside. Old habits, Frank said, tapping his temple. I still know people at the bank. They owe me favors. He sipped his decaf, wincing. Richard doesn't know yet, but this ain't their first rodeo. They've been skimming for years. I flipped through the papers, numbers blurring. Christina's cold laugh from our call rang in my ears. Deal with it. She thought she was untouchable. Jonathan, with his smug grins, thought the same. My jaw tightened, a plan forming, its edges vague but sharpening. I'd been an engineer building systems, finding stress points. I could break theirs. Gary Frank's voice cut through. You okay? Yeah, I said, closing the folder. Just thinking. I slid it back to him. Keep this safe, I'll need it. He nodded, his eyes searching mine. Be careful. They're reckless, but they're not stupid. I gave a tight smile, draining my coffee. Reckless was right, and I'd use it. Outside, the spring sun was high, Concord streets alive with dog walkers and cyclists. I started home, the folders weighed in my mind. At the corner, Ellen waved from her porch, her terrier yapping. Gary heard about the party, she called, stepping closer. You didn't deserve that nonsense. Thanks, Ellen, I said, pausing. Just sorting it out. Her kindness, like Tom's at the cafe, reminded me I wasn't alone. Concord had my back. It fueled me like a circuit completing its loop. Give 'em hell, she said, winking. I chuckled, the first real laugh in days, and kept walking. At home, I dug through my study, finding my old engineering notebook. Leather-bound pages, yellowed but sturdy. I flipped to a blank page, the pen heavy in my hand. Christina and Jonathan thought they'd won, thought I'd crumble. But I was done being their fool. I started jotting notes, names, dates, ideas. The desk lamp cast a narrow glow, the house dark around me. The pen scratched each stroke a step toward something bigger. They'd face consequences, and I'd make sure they never saw it coming. The desk lamp flickered as I sealed the envelope, my fingers pressing the adhesive firmly, the faint stickiness lingering on my skin. Inside were copies of Frank's documents, bank statements, wire transfers, proof that Christina and Jonathan had stolen from Richard to buy that Tesla. I triple-checked every page, my engineer's precision guiding me. No mistakes, no trace back to me. I leaned back the chair, creaking, a quiet thrill running through me. This was it, my first move, not a shout, not a scene, but a calculated strike. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, a symbol of justice taking shape. They'd mocked me, humiliated me. Now they'd feel the weight of their lies. I slipped the envelope into a plain manila folder and headed out, locking the door behind me. The morning air was crisp, Concord's streets still sleepy under a pale May sky. At a small park near the edge of town, I met the courier, a wiry man in a gray hoodie, his eyes darting as he took the folder. "No return address," I said, my voice low. "Deliver it to Richard Wilson's office by noon." "Cash?" he asked, his jaw twitching. As agreed, I slid the bills across the bench, crisp against his palm. He nodded and disappeared down the path, his sneakers scuffing the gravel. Anonymity was my shield. Richard would get the truth, but my name wouldn't touch it. In the library, I sat at a computer accessing public records. My engineering skills and old financial data courses helped me track Christina and Jonathan's spending, credit card filings, property records, a trail of extravagance. Designer clothes a second, home in Nantucket, dinners that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Greed laid bare in black and white. I scribbled notes, my pen scratching furiously, each fact a brick in the wall I was building. The library's quiet took me back to 1987. My drafting table cluttered with blueprints, a client's warehouse project failing. Faulty beams, bad math. I'd reworked the design in one night, coffee cups piling up, my slide rule a blur. By dawn, it was perfect. That same focus drove me now. Christina and Jonathan weren't beams, but they were flawed, breakable. I'd find their stress points. Gary, Mrs. Larson, the librarian, paused by my table, her glasses perched on her nose. "You're deep in it today, researching for the Historical Society." I smiled, closing my notebook. "Something like that, just digging into Concord's past." A half-truth, but it landed. She chuckled, adjusting a stack of books. "Don't miss our talk on the Old North Bridge next week. You'd love it." Her warmth reminded me why I stayed in this town. People who saw me, not the caricature Christina painted. I nodded, promising to consider it, and she shuffled off. I left the library with a stack of printed records, my mind buzzing. The documents for Richard were just the start. Every lavish purchase, every shady deal, they were ammunition. I drove home, the truck's engine a steady hum. My thoughts sharp. Christina's laughter, "Deal with it," echoed, but it didn't sting anymore. It fueled me. At home, I sank into my armchair, the house dark except for my phone's glow. I checked it obsessively, waiting for any sign Richard had received the packet. The screen stayed blank, but my anticipation grew a live wire in my chest. From the edge of Richard's estate, I sipped coffee from a thermos, my truck parked discreetly behind a row of maples. His mansion loomed across the street, white columns, iron gates, a fortress of wealth. Christina's BMW screeched into the driveway, Jonathan's Audi close behind. They spilled out her heels, clicking as tie loose, both moving like cornered animals. Richard had called them, no doubt, about the documents I'd sent. I stayed low, my pulse quick, savoring the crack in their perfect facade. I didn't linger, too risky. I drove to Main Street, the thermos warm in my hand, and slipped into the coffee shop. The place was cozy, all wood beams and soft lighting, the air thick with espresso and cinnamon. I took a corner table, my back to the wall, and opened my laptop, pretending to work. My real focus was the buzz around me, Concord's rumor mill churning. Tom slid into the seat across from me, his eyes bright with gossip. "Heard something wild," he said, leaning in, his voice low. "Caught a fight at the club last night. Christina and Jonathan tearing into each other in Richard's office. She was screaming about lies and setups. He was yelling about lawyers. Sounded like Richard laid into them hard. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my face neutral. What kind of lies? My coffee cup was cracked, a hairline fracture under my thumb, mirroring their crumbling image. Something about that Tesla, Tom said, stirring his latte. Richard got papers showing they used his money, forged his name, moved it through some shady account. He's furious. Hired a private investigator to check the documents and filed a complaint with the financial regulator. Decided not to go to the police yet, avoid a scandal. But he threatened to cut them off from the family funds if they don't return the money. Cut them off, I asked, a quiet thrill curling in my chest. Tom shook his head, oblivious to my role. They're scrambling, Gary. Not so high and mighty now. I nodded, sipping my coffee, its bitterness sharp. Years of their slights flashed through me, Christina forgetting my 60th birthday, too busy with a gala to call. I'd waited by the phone, hopeful, only to get a text 2 days later. Sorry, swamped. I'd swallowed the hurt then. Not anymore. The shop's door chimed, and there they were, Christina and Jonathan, forcing smiles for a group of friends at a nearby table. Everything's fine, Christina said, waving off a question, her voice brittle. Jonathan ordered a coffee, his hands shaking as he paid. The barista shot them a curious glance, sensing the strain. I kept my eyes on my screen, my heart pounding. Their mask was slipping, and I was pulling the strings. Outside, I ran into Ellen, her terrier tugging at its leash. Saw Jonathan in town earlier, she said, adjusting her scarf. Looked like he hadn't slept in days. Trouble in paradise. Sounds like it, I said, my tone light, my smirk hidden. Guess they've got some explaining to do. Ellen grinned, oblivious, and we parted ways. Her words fed my satisfaction like fuel on a fire. Concord was watching, judging. Their perfect life was cracking. And I wasn't done. The coffee shop's warmth lingered, pulling up a memory. Christina's first apartment, me hauling furniture up 3 flights, her barely thanking me. I'd brushed it off, told myself she was young, busy. Now I saw it for what it was, entitlement. That patience was gone, replaced by a cold, steady resolve. As dusk settled over Concord, I walked home, the air cool, the streets glowing with lamplight. My phone buzzed, a text from Tom, more drama at the Wilsons. C, screaming at Jay in the driveway. It's a mess. I read it twice, a faint smile tugging at my lips. The cracked coffee cup flashed in my mind, a perfect image of their fracturing world. I slipped the phone into my pocket, my steps light. The night stretched out with possibilities, a blueprint unfolding in the dark. I sat on the porch swing, the morning sun warm on my face, scrolling through Facebook. Christina's latest post blazed across the screen, my father spreading vicious lies about us. Jealousy's ugly, Dad. Comments poured into, some supportive, others skeptical. My jaw tightened, but a chuckle escaped. They were flailing, accusing me to save face, and it was backfiring. A wilting petunia in a pot by the swing caught my eye, its petals curling, a quiet echo of their fading credibility. I set my coffee down, the mug cool against the weathered wood. Their desperation was almost comical. They thought they could turn Concord against me, paint me as the villain. But I'd stayed quiet, stayed hidden, let them dig their own grave. My phone buzzed, Frank asking to meet. Urgent. I grabbed my keys, the swing still swaying as I headed for Minuteman Park. Frank waited on a bench, his hands fidgeting, a nervous laugh escaping as I approached. They tried to bribe me, he said, his voice low, glancing around. The air smelled of cut grass leaves rustling in the breeze. Showed up at my house last night. Christina all smiles, offering 10 grand to say those documents were fake. Jonathan just glared like he wanted to scare me. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, and told him to get lost. Frank set his eyes hard. I'm not playing their game, but they're desperate, Gary. They know Richard's done with them. His fingers trembled, his arthritis betraying his calm. Watch your back. They're cornered. I nodded, my mind racing. A bribe, sloppy, reckless. They were unraveling faster than I'd expected. Thanks for the heads up, I said, my voice calm, though satisfaction burned in my chest. Keep me posted. Frank clapped my shoulder, his grip firm, and we parted ways, the park's quiet wrapping around me. At the corner store picking up milk, I ran into Maria. Heard Christina stirring up drama online, she said, ringing me up, her tone gossipy but kind. Folks are saying she's in over her head. Rough week for her, huh? Seems so, I said, slipping her a smile. Guess the truth catches up. She laughed, handing me my change, and I left, the bell jingling behind me. Concord's whispers were turning against them, their allies thinning. My steps felt lighter, the milk jug swinging in my hand. Back home, I sat at my desk pulling up Christina's post again. The comments had shifted. Sounds like you're dodging Christina. What's the real story? Their support was crumbling their lies too thin to hold. I leaned back, my smirk widening, the mouse steady under my hand. The wilting petunia flashed in my mind, a perfect image of their collapse. They thought they could outmaneuver me, but I was 3 steps ahead. My next move was forming quiet and sharp, waiting to strike. The attorney's office door clicked shut behind me, my worn briefcase thumping onto the polished oak desk. The room smelled of leather and old books, a faint hum of traffic seeping through the window from Concord's bustling streets. Margaret, my lawyer, for 2 decades, adjusted her old-fashioned glasses, her sharp eyes meeting mine, ready to talk numbers. "Gary?" she asked, her voice steady, professional. I nodded, setting the briefcase down, its scuffed leather a quiet testament to years of careful choices. "Let's get to it." My voice was calm, but a current of pride ran through me, like a circuit sparking to life. Christina and Jonathan thought they knew me, a modest retiree scraping by on an engineer's pension. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Margaret pulled a file, her pen tapping the page. "Your investments, real estate, stocks, bonds. You've built quite a nest egg, 8 figures conservatively." She leaned back, her glasses catching the light. "Most clients would have flaunted that. You didn't. Never saw the need," I said, my fingers tracing the briefcase's handle. "It was for security, not show." The room's quiet took me back to 1989, a rundown duplex I'd bought cheap, fixed up and rented out. No vacations, no fancy cars, just discipline. Every dollar saved was a brick in my fortress, one they'd never suspected. She slid a legal pad across. "You mentioned a strategy against your daughter and her husband. Defamation, fraud, serious claims. With this wealth, you've got leverage. What's the play?" I leaned forward, my voice low. "File a lawsuit. Defamation for her Facebook posts. Financial misconduct for what they did to Richard. Use the documents from Frank. Hit them where it hurts." My words were measured, but my pulse quickened. This wasn't revenge. It was justice, precise and cold, like a perfectly balanced equation. Margaret scribbled notes, nodding. "We can start with a civil suit. Public records, Richard's testimony, it's strong. But it'll get messy, you sure certain?" I said, my jaw tight. They've had their chances. She met my gaze, her nod final, and we mapped out the first steps, her pen scratching like a metronome. The lamp in the corner flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room, as if the walls themselves were bracing for the storm I'd unleashed. My phone buzzed as I stepped onto Concord's Main Street, the air sweet with blooming lilacs. Christina's name flashed on the screen. I answered, bracing myself. "Dad, please," she said, her voice shaky, almost unrecognizable. "Whatever you're doing, stop it. You're tearing us apart. You tore this apart." I said, my tone flat. "You made your choices." Her sob crackled through the line, but I hung up my hand steady. She knew I was behind it, or suspected. Good. Let her squirm. At the bakery, picking up a loaf of rye, Mrs. Carter beamed from behind the counter. "Gary, you're looking spry today," she said, sliding the bread into a bag. "Heard you've been the talk of the town, always helping folks out." "Just doing my part," I said, my smile genuine but brief. Her warmth grounded me, a reminder of who I was, to Concord, not the villain Christina painted. I left the bell jingling, my mind on the lawsuit. The briefcase in my hand felt heavier, its worn surface hiding the power I'd unleashed. Back home, I spread legal papers across my dining table, the house quiet except for the clock's soft tick. Margaret's draft complaint listed every lie, every theft in stark black ink. My phone buzzed again. Christina, another call. I let it ring, the sound sharp against the silence. My eyes stayed on the papers, each line a step closer to justice. The briefcase sat nearby, a silent partner in my plan, its scuffs glowing faintly under the lamp. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as I unfolded Margaret's email, the lawsuit's filing confirmation glowing on my laptop screen. Defamation, financial misconduct, all laid out in crisp legalese aimed at Christina and Jonathan like a well-placed arrow. My coffee steamed untouched, the morning light slanting through the window. The words blurred briefly, not from doubt, but from the weight of it. Justice was moving, a machine I'd set in motion. I headed to the Concord market, the air alive with chatter and the scent of fresh produce. Stalls brimmed with apples, greens, homemade jams, the crowd a mix of locals and weekenders. I lingered by a honey vendor, my cap pulled low when I spotted her Christina across the aisle, her designer sunglasses perched on her head. Her smile was forced, her laugh too loud as she chatted with a woman who edged away, her expression cool. Friends were slipping from her grasp, their whispers sharp. I turned away, my pulse quick, savoring the cracks in her world. The market's bustle pulled up a memory. 2005, Christina's car repossessed, her voice panicked on the phone. I'd wired her the money, drained my savings to keep her afloat. Her thank you was a curt text, no call, no warmth. I told myself she was stressed. Now I saw it clearly, ingratitude woven into her core. My hands tightened around a jar of honey, the glass cool against my skin. My phone buzzed, Christina again. I stepped behind a stall, the crowd's noise muffling her sobs as I answered. Dad, you're ruining me, she pleaded, her voice raw. The lawsuit, the gossip, everyone's turning on me. Please stop. You stopped being my daughter when you chose lies, I said, my voice cold, unyielding. Face what you've done, I hung up her gasp, cut off my chest tight but resolute. The market swirled around me, oblivious, a dropped apple rolling past Christina's feet, ignored by the crowd. It lay there, bruised, a mirror to her fall. I moved through the stalls, catching snippets of gossip. Christina's in deep, a woman muttered, hefting a basket. Stole from her own family, they say. Another nodded, her voice gleeful. Serves her right. I kept my face neutral, my cap shielding my eyes, but inside satisfaction burned. Concord was turning their judgment swift. At home, I called Margaret for an update. It's filed. She confirmed, her tone crisp. Public record now. Her social circles are pulling back. I saw it on their posts. She's losing ground fast. I thanked her, hanging up as the clock struck noon. The lawsuit was a blade cutting through her lies, and I held the handle. Later, walking past the market at night, the stalls shuddered. I caught more whispers from stragglers. Christina's done for one, said, their voice carrying on the cool air. The market lights glowed faintly, casting my silhouette long and steady across the pavement. Jonathan's fate loomed untouched, a final piece in my plan. I kept walking, the whispers trailing me their weight, a quiet promise of more to come. The morning paper crinkled on my porch, the headline, Stark Local Businessman Fired Amid Financial Scandal. Jonathan's name blazed in bold, his corporate headshot staring blankly from the page. I leaned back in the swing, the wood creaking, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. My anonymous tip to his company bank records, emails, proof of his role in Richard's theft had landed. His job, his status gone. My plan was complete, but the morning air felt lighter, freer. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm against my palms, when a car pulled up, Christina's BMW gleaming despite her fall. She and Jonathan stepped out, her face pale, his hands trembling as he adjusted his tie. Richard had called me the day before, thanking me for the documents that exposed their scam. During the call, he'd mentioned my investments, not knowing Christina was listening on the other line. You're modest, Gary, but your wealth is impressive, he'd said. They'd heard no doubt from Richard or a leak. They crossed the lawn, their steps hesitant, like children caught stealing. I stood setting the paper down, my expression stone. Dad, Christina started, her voice cracking. We're sorry, we didn't know your money, everything. Can we just talk? Jonathan nodded, his voice shaky. We messed up, Gary. Let's fix this family right. His hands shook, betraying his bravado. Their faces pulled up a memory, Christina at 16. Me working double shifts to pay for her dance lessons, her dreams. I'd come home exhausted, her smile, my reward. Now that girl was gone, replaced by this stranger begging for mercy she didn't deserve. I stepped back, my hand on the door. You don't get to rewrite this, I said, my voice low. For now, justice is done. I closed the door, the latch clicking. Their apologies cut off. They stood frozen, then shuffled back to their car, the engine roaring as they fled. I exhaled, the weight of years lifting. My home modest, but mine felt solid around me, its quiet calm a balm. The suitcase by the door was packed, a solo trip to Maine, a cabin by the sea, booked with my own money. Freedom earned. Ellen stopped by later, her terrier yapping as she leaned over the porch rail. Gary, you're the talk of Concord, she said, her grin wide. Stood up to those two, didn't you? Always knew you had steel in you. Just doing what's right, I said. My smile warm but brief. Her praise settled over me, a final nod from the town that had watched my fight. I waved as she left the terrier's barks fading down the street. I grabbed my suitcase, its leather handle smooth under my grip, a symbol of the life I'd reclaimed. The house locked behind me. I climbed into my pickup, the engine rumbling to life. Concord streets rolled past colonial homes, green lawns, the familiar heartbeat of my town. The open road stretched ahead, the horizon wide my heart light. I'd faced their betrayal, their lies, and come out whole. The suitcase rattled in the back, and I drove on free at last. The Maine coast unfolded before me, the sea a shimmering expanse under a sky bruised with dusk. I pulled into the cabin's gravel drive, the air sharp with salt and pine. The suitcase sat beside me, a quiet companion. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled in the hearth, its glow casting shadows that danced like the ghosts of my past. I sank into a chair, the ocean's rhythm, a steady pulse outside. The cracked mug flashed in my mind, its flaw a mirror to what I'd overcome. I'd built bridges, circuits, a life of quiet strength. Christina and Jonathan had tried to break it, but I'd rebuilt myself stronger, unshakable. I poured a glass of whiskey, Tom's gift from the party, and raised it to the sea. To justice, I whispered the words, soft but sure. The fire flickered, the shadows still, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. The horizon stretched endless, a promise of new beginnings, and I was ready to meet it. The dawn light filtered through my kitchen window, painting the linoleum in soft golds, the cracked coffee mug warm in my hands. I stood alone, the house quiet except for the faint tick of the clock, its rhythm a steady pulse against the case of the past weeks. Christina's betrayal, her mocking gift, her venomous Facebook posts lingered like a bruise, but it was no longer raw. I sipped the coffee, its bitterness a familiar anchor, and let my mind drift, tracing the fault lines of our fractured bond. I wasn't the man she thought I was, the relic she'd mocked at Richard's party. I was something more, something forged in sacrifice and silence, and I was ready to prove it. My thoughts spiraled back to 1995, Christina at 10, her small hands clutching a model bridge I'd built for her science fair. "Daddy, you're a wizard," she'd said, her eyes wide, her gap-toothed grin lighting up the gymnasium. I'd spent nights crafting it, my fingers sore from balsa wood and glue, my heart full from her pride. That girl believed I could fix anything, Richard's dreams, her world. Now she saw only my faded khakis, my rusty pickup, a father who didn't measure up to her glittering life. The memory stung, but it also sharpened my resolve like a circuit sparking to life. I wasn't that wizard anymore, but I was something stronger, a man who'd learned to wield his quiet power. The mug's crack under my thumb felt like a metaphor, a flaw that didn't break it, but defined it. Betrayal had cracked me too. Christina's laughter at my birthday, Jonathan's smug pat, their stolen Tesla gleaming like a lie. But cracks could be mended, reinforced. I'd spent my career as an engineer finding stress points, making structures stronger. Now I was rebuilding myself, not with apologies or tears, but with action, deliberate and precise. I set the mug down and grabbed my notebook, its leather cover worn but sturdy like me. I flipped through pages of notes, bank records, wire transfers, the proof of their theft I'd sent to Richard. Each scribble was a step toward justice, a reclaiming of my worth. The lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room, as if the house itself was whispering encouragement. I wasn't just fighting for me, I was fighting for every sacrifice I'd made, late nights, funding her college, the second mortgage for her wedding, the silence I'd swallowed when she dismissed me. Justice wasn't just punishment, it was balance, a scale tipped back in my favor. The phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from Ellen Hurd. "Christina's losing friends left and right. You okay?" I smiled, typing a quick reply. "Holding steady. Thanks." Concord's support, Ellen's fierce loyalty, Tom's gossip, Maria's warmth wove a net around me. A community that saw my worth when Christina didn't. Their faith fueled me, a quiet strength that countered her public lies. I wasn't alone, and that truth burned brighter than her betrayal. I stepped onto the porch, the morning air cool, the lilac scent sharp. The swing creaked as I sat, my notebook open in my lap. Another memory surfaced, 2008. Christina's college graduation. Her cap tassel swinging as she hugged me, her voice soft. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." I'd beamed my chest tight with pride, ignoring the overtime hours, the skipped, vacations. That gratitude was gone now, replaced by her cold smirk at my birthday, her post calling me the worst father ever. The contrast carved a hollow in me, but it also lit a fire. Betrayal wasn't just her gift, it was her choice to erase me, to rewrite our history for likes and sympathy. I wrote in the notebook, my pen scratching, self-worth isn't what they give you, it's what you build. The words felt like a vow etched in ink and resolve. I'd let her mockery define me for too long, let her silence chip away at my pride. No more. I was more than her punchline, more than the rusty pickup she scorned. I was the man who'd carried her dreams, who'd built a fortune in the shadows, who'd outsmarted her lies. The pen paused, the ink bleeding slightly, a small imperfection that mirrored my journey, flawed but strong. The market came alive that afternoon, stalls bustling with color and noise. I wandered through a bag of apples in hand, catching whispers about Christina and Jonathan. They're done for, a vendor buttered, her voice gleeful. Stole from Richard, and now everyone knows. I kept my cap low, my face neutral, but inside satisfaction curled like smoke. Their facade was crumbling, and I was the architect of its fall. The apple's weight grounded me, a reminder of the simple life I'd chosen, one they'd mocked, but could never break. Another flashback hit 2015. Christina's wedding, me walking her down the aisle, my suit stiff, my heart full. She'd squeezed my arm, her smile radiant, but later at the reception, she'd barely spoken to me, too busy with Jonathan's elite friends. I'd stood by the bar alone, my toast cut short by her wave. Later, Dad, she'd said, her voice distant. I'd swallowed the hurt, told myself she was caught up in the moment. Now I saw it clearly. She'd been pulling away for years, her love conditional, tied to what I could give. The market's noise faded, and I leaned against the stall, the wood rough under my palm. That hurt wasn't just pain, it was clarity. I'd given her everything, my time, my money, my heart, and she'd thrown it back. But I wasn't empty. I had conquered my home, my strength. I straightened the apple, swinging in my hand, my steps firm. Resilience wasn't just surviving her betrayal, it was thriving beyond it. Back home, I sat at my desk, the lawsuit papers spread out. Margaret's precise handwriting, a map of my victory. The lamp flickered again, its light dancing across the pages. I closed my eyes and a vision came, my old drafting table, 1990, a bridge design failing under stress. I'd stayed up all night recalculating, finding the flaw, making it stronger. That's what I was doing now, recalculating my life, finding the flaw in their lies, building myself anew. The image was vivid, almost otherworldly, the blueprints glowing faintly like a spell cast in ink. My phone buzzed, Christina's name again. I ignored it, her pleas no longer pulling me. Another memory surfaced, her first car, a beat-up sedan I'd fixed up, its engine purring after hours in my garage. She'd hug me, her joy real, untainted. That girl was gone, buried under ambition and greed, but I wasn't mourning her anymore. I was letting her go, choosing myself instead. I walked to the window, Concord's streets, quiet under a dusk sky, bruised with purple. The colonial houses stood like sentinels, their windows glowing with lives I'd helped shape, Ellen's porch, Tom's garden, Maria's cafe. They saw me not as a relic, but as a man of steel and quiet power. That truth was my foundation, stronger than any bridge I'd built. The confrontation came days later, and on my porch, the air heavy with the scent of rain. Christina and Jonathan stood before me, their faces drawn, their confidence shattered. "Dad, we're sorry," Christina said, her voice breaking. "We didn't know about your money. Please stop this." Jonathan nodded, his hands shaking. "Let's fix this, Gary. As a family." His words were hollow, a last-ditch plea. I looked at them, their desperation stark under the porch light. Another memory flashed, 1987, Christina's first bike. Me running beside her, steadying her until she pedaled free. I'd let go, then trusting her to ride. Now I was letting go again, but for me, "You don't get to rewrite this," I said, my voice steady, final. "Justice is done." I closed the door, the latch clicking, their shadows fading as they retreated. The house was quiet, the lamp steady now, its glow warm. I packed my suitcase for Maine, each item a choice, my notebook, my cracked mug, symbols of my resilience. The themes of my life crystallized: justice, not. Revenge had balanced the scales, self-worth, not their approval, had rebuilt me. Betrayal had cracked me, but resilience had made me whole. In Maine, the cabin's fire crackled, the sea's rhythm, a lullaby outside. I sat by the hearth, whiskey in hand, the horizon vast through the window. The cracked mug sat on the table, its flaw a badge of my journey. I'd faced their lies, exposed their greed, and emerged stronger, my worth undeniable. The fire danced shadows soft now, and I raised my glass. To me I whispered the words, a vow, the sea echoing my peace. The main coast stretched before me, a canvas of silver waves and bruised skies, the horizon endless under the weight of dusk. My pickup rumbled to a stop in the gravel drive of the seaside cabin, its headlights cutting through the twilight like a promise kept. I stepped out, the air sharp with salt and pine, the suitcase in my hand, a quiet companion, its leather handle smooth from years of use. The ocean's rhythm pulsed in the distance, a steady heartbeat that matched my own. I'd come here to escape, to breathe, to find the peace I'd earned. The cracked mug rattled in the suitcase, a relic of my journey, its flaw a badge of my resilience. Inside the cabin was warm, the hearth already crackling its glow, casting dancing shadows across the pine walls. I set the suitcase down, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and unpacked slowly, deliberately. My notebook, its pages filled with the blueprint of my justice, sat beside the mug, their worn surfaces glowing faintly in the firelight. I poured a glass of whiskey, Brian's gift, from the birthday that had sparked this reckoning, and sank into a chair by the window, the sea's whisper wrapping around me like a lullaby. The fire popped and my mind drifted back to Concord, to the porch where I'd faced Christina and Jonathan one last time. Their faces pale, desperate, stripped of their polished arrogance, flashed in my memory. "Dad, we're sorry," Christina had pleaded, her voice breaking. Jonathan's shaky nod, his plea to fix this family, had been a hollow echo. I'd closed the door on them, the latches click, a final note in our fractured song. They'd betrayed me, mocked my sacrifices, painted me as a villain for their audience. But I'd rewritten the story, not with their lies, but with truth sharp, undeniable, forged in the quiet strength they'd underestimated. I sipped the whiskey, its warmth spreading through me, chasing away the last chill of their betrayal. The ocean rolled outside its waves, a steady reminder of time's persistence. I'd spent years building bridges, circuits, a life of quiet sacrifice for Christina, college tuition, her wedding, her dreams. Each memory had been a brick in my foundation, one she'd tried to topple with her scorn. But I hadn't crumbled. I'd rebuilt stronger, my wealth, a secret weapon, my community, a shield. Concord's voices, Ellen's fierce loyalty, Tom's gossip, Maria's warmth had held me up when she tore me down. They'd seen me not as the worst father ever, but as a man of steel and heart. The firelight flickered, casting my reflection in the window, gray hair, lined face but eyes alive with a clarity I hadn't known in years. A memory surfaced, soft and vivid, Christina at 6, her tiny hand in mine, as we walked through Concord's fair. Her laughter bright as the carousel's lights. I'd carried her on my shoulders, her trust absolute. That girl was gone, lost to ambition and greed, but I didn't mourn her anymore. I'd let her go, choosing myself instead. The realization was a quiet triumph, like a circuit completing its loop, its current steady and true. I leaned back the chair, creaking the whiskey glass cool against my palm. The suitcase sat open, the cracked mug catching the fire's glow, its flaw a mirror to my own imperfect but whole. Justice had been my compass, not revenge. I'd exposed their lies, the stolen Tesla, the forged accounts with precision, not rage. My lawsuit, my anonymous tips had tipped the scales, restoring balance. Self-worth wasn't their approval. It was the life I'd built, the community I'd nurtured, the strength I'd found in the ashes of their betrayal. Resilience wasn't just surviving their scorn. It was thriving beyond it, here in this cabin, with the sea as my witness. The horizon darkened, stars pricking through the sky like blueprints of a new beginning. I thought of Concord, its colonial houses glowing with lives. I'd touched Ellen's porch, Tom's garden, Maria's cafe. They'd stood by me, their faith a quiet power that outshone Christina's lies. The town had judged her, not me, their whispers, a verdict on her greed. I'd walked away from her final plea, not with anger, but with peace, my heart light for the first time in years. I raised my glass to the sea, the whiskey catching the fire's glow. To justice, I whispered the words soft but sure. To me, the ocean answered, its waves a steady pulse, echoing my resolve. The fire danced, its shadow soft now, no longer jagged. I'd faced betrayal, exposed lies, and emerged whole. The cracked mug sat on the table, its flaw a testament to my journey, not broken, but stronger for it. The cabin's quiet wrapped around me, the sea's rhythm a promise of new roads, new horizons. My pickup waited outside its rusty frame, a symbol of my endurance ready to carry me forward. I'd built a life of sacrifice, of silent strength, and no one could take that from me. Not Christina, not Jonathan, not their lies. The whiskey burned my throat, a final toast to the man I'd become. The stars outside gleamed endless and bright, and I was ready to meet them.